Praise be to the Emperor, for he has provided for us a new Sisters of Battle Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where today we're here to review the new Codex Adepta Sororitas, and take a look at all the new goodies for the Sisters of Battle. As updates go, it's a fairly recent one. The last Codex came out around about a year and a half ago, I believe. Though to be honest, I'm surprised at just how many changes have happened since then. Almost every rule in the book seems to have been redesigned, and there's some pretty hefty changes between all the datasheets, at least compared with some of the codexes that have come out so far. In this review, we'll be focusing on the match play section for the Codex, going over all the new units, including more than Val and those Sacrosants, all the rules for the Sisters' armies, including things like Miracle Dice, Sacred Rites, and everything that applies to the whole army, the upgrades for the characters, and how all of the other datasheets in the Codex have also changed. Tons of stuff to go through here, so let's jump straight in. So here's the rough contents of Codex Adepta Sororitas. As always, an extensive lore and background section, miniature galleries of painted models, and a shiny new Crusade section, one of the main mechanics being elevating a Sister of Battle up to a living saint. As always, we have all the datasheets in the Codex, new units including More Than Var, the Celestian Sacrosants, Paragon Warsuits, the Castigator Battle Tank, the Dogmata, Astrith Thurger and her Scribe, the Palatine, the Sister's Lieutenant, and Ephrael Stern and Kaiganil, the Demonofuge character that came out in the Pariah book, but is now very much a fully functioning part of the Sisters Codex. All the points costs remain the same for the ones that we saw in Chapter Approved 2021. Sisters have really quite a heavy section for whole army rules. They've got both Miracle Dice and Acts of Faith, Sacred Rites, Shield of Faith, the usual 4 pages of Stratagems, 6 main orders with their own unique Warlord Trait, Relic and Stratagem, a custom order building mechanic where you can pick between any of 16 traits, and 4 new secondary objectives. To soup up their characters, they've got their normal Warlord Traits and Relics. They also have a new mechanic called Hymns of Battle. They can basically be chanted similar to Chaplain Litanies by any of the priest characters, either the Ministorum ones, the new Dogmata, or the Dialogus. There's 6 of those and 1 generic one. And then there's something called Blessings of the Faithful, which are the paid for in points character upgrade thing for the Sisters of Battle. We'll get onto them all in due course. I thought we'd start out with some of the more generic whole army rules for the Sisters. They really do have quite a lot of layered things going on. Their Battle Sister Squad troops choices get OBSEC in a Sisters detachment. Everyone gets their Order Conviction chapter tactics, unless they're either Sanctified or Outcast models. Sanctified generally tend to be things like special characters, and Outcasts are things like Penitent Engines, Ephrael Stern, and a few others. And of course none of the Ecclesiarchy Battle Conclave units get it either. They now all have the Adeptus Ministorum keyword, but they also have the Cult Imperialis keyword instead of an Order one. There's a slightly new rule called the Decree Passive, which, similar to quite a lot of the armies that we've seen so far, is a limit on how many HQ choices you can spam. You can only have 1 Canoness and 1 Missionary per detachment, and you can't have more Cult Imperialis priest models than Sororitas characters within the detachment. Shouldn't really be too hard, to be honest. The Sisters are absolutely overflowing with support characters now. The Shield of Faith is tweaked a little bit. The 6+ invul save that can be improved by a few means is still there. But their 1d6 Psychic Denial has actually become kind of meaningful, because now if you roll a 6 then it automatically denies the power, so at least there's a point in rolling it. Before, when they tried to deny with this, it could be a bit pointless to try and roll the d6 if your opponent's already cast it on higher than a 7 or something. I quite like that. It's not going to come up all that often, but every so often they will resist something. The Zealot rule is unchanged. The first round of melee you get to re-roll hit rolls. That still applies to the priests, the Battle Conclave units, and now to Mortifiers as well. Miracle Dice, Acts of Faith and Sacred Rites are all still here. We'll cover those in just a second. And a few standard pieces of equipment have changed. All Flamers and Hand Flamers and Heavy Flamers have the Ministorum word in front of them. You've got a Ministorum Flamer. All of these are basically the same as their standard variants, except they get +1 strength. So Strength 4 12-inch range Hand Flamers, Strength 5 regular ones, and Strength 6 AP-1 Heavy Flamers. All very toasty. Typically the Hand Flamers and regular Flamers both cost 5 points. A few of these squads can take the option of Artificer Storm Bolters. Both the standard Battle Sisters and the Dominion squad are maybe where it's most relevant. They all got upgraded to Damage 2, and they are a 5-point upgrade over the standard Bolter. It's quite nice to be able to spam quite so many high damage shots against the opponent, and they do have a fun stratagem to go with it, but it is just the standard ones that are carried by the squads. It's not things like vehicle mounted Storm Bolters or the ones on those Paragon Warsuits. Finally, the Condemner Bolt Gun has also changed as well. Its stake profile is now strength 4 AP -1 flat damage 2, and if it hits a Psyker then it causes D3 mortal wounds on them immediately, so it does become quite good at its job now. It is a bit more expensive for that though, it's now a 10-point upgrade, so you are turning down something like a Meltagon instead of that. So I'm really glad to see that they didn't mess with Miracle Dice and Acts of Faith all that much. The basic mechanic remains the same, you get a dice at the start of each round, you roll it and keep the result, and then you can substitute that number into other dice rolls. They have slightly changed it in that it is now a pure Sororitas army only now, excluding models that are Court Imperialis, Agent of the Imperium, and unaligned units. It's definitely a powerful incentive to play pure sisters, but I feel like just in terms of raw power, they might be a little bit diminished in how many that you might be getting. Now there are a few less ways to gain them. You still get the one for free at the start of each battle round, and then one at the end of each phase when a Sororitas unit kills an enemy unit, or a Sororitas character is destroyed. Otherwise, there's a few other things like datasheet abilities, order convictions and things that can either allow you to regenerate them or gain more. As before, you roll the dice, keep the number in a dice pool off to the side, and then you can do an act of faith each phase, but usually just one unless you have a Simulacrum Imperialis in the unit. You can substitute the miracle dice in place of the dice that you're rolling for, and they list the ones that you can use: advance, charge, hit, wound, save, damage or morale tests, but they do seem to have got rid of the psychic denial one. Morale tests are kind of handy, as they could be a good place to burn low-level miracle dice. It's quite nice that the charge move one remains as well. It still means that you can get your automatic 9-inch charge out of Deep Strike by using a couple of miracle dice on that roll. When you substitute them, they count as the unmodified number and can't be re-rolled. I'd say aside from charges, the single highest value might be using a 6 to get an automatic invul save, as pretty much everything has the Shield of Faith invul save rule for a 6+, or maybe using a 6 to guarantee that amount of damage through when you get a wound through with a multi-melter. There's also a few other ways that you can spend them. Some stratagems need you to spend them, and you can spend them on those new blessings of the faithful. Next up we have Sacred Rites, which are no longer a whole army bonus for the sisters. It appears to me that they now just get them anyway. These ones really haven't been tweaked all that much. They're basically an army-wide bonus to all of the standard sisters units, not things like Battle Conclave or Mortifiers or things, and you get to see them after you've determined the mission, so usually after seeing your opponent's army. You can either pick one of them or roll for two different ones, and there now are a few more mechanics that use the Sacred Rites, such as say the Triumph of St. Catherine getting all of them, or the Ebon Chalice Order getting 2. Hand of the Emperor remains +1 to advance and charge. Spirit of the Martyr is a bit different but not very good. If the enemy kills your models in melee, you roll a dice for each model that dies, and for each roll of a 6 they take a mortal wound. Sounds fun, but realistically isn't going to add up to much. Aegis of the Emperor could be quite handy against Psykers. It gets that Shield of Faith up to a 5+ chance to auto-deny the Witch. Divine Guidance is the shooting buff. Wound rolls of a 6 for ranged attacks get an extra AP -1. Not too bad if you've got loads of bolters or heavy bolters, for example. The Passion is still the really powerful melee buff. Unmodified melee hit rolls of a 6 get an extra hit on the opponent, so exploding 6s in combat, it's really strong. And Light of the Emperor allows you to ignore leadership and combat attrition modifiers. Rarely going to be worth it, I think. Out of these, I think I'd usually just pick one myself. I think that enough of them are really quite weak just to not be worth bothering with. Spirit of the Martyr is a bit rubbish. Aegis of the Emperor is only good against certain armies and useless against others, and Light of the Emperor is quite weak as well. I think probably the strongest use is using the Passion to get extra melee damage. Though a tough call against Hand of the Emperor for +1 to advance and charge, and if you're going a bit more shooting then Divine Guidance seems fine. So next up, let's go through the Sisters' stratagems then. First up we have Cleansed by Fire. This one used to be an Ebon Chalice one, but it's now usable by everyone and quite a big boost to Flamers. It means that all Flamers in the unit automatically get the max amount of shots, usually 6, and it could be quite good on something like Quad Heavy Flamer Retributors, or maybe even more terrifyingly on a big unit of Penitent Engines or Mortifiers. If a max unit got in range, that'd be 48 auto hits with those strength 6 Flamers they have. Seems pretty strong in the right circumstances. Next up we have Embodied Prophecy for 2 CP. This is a Zephyrim stratagem getting them +1 to wound, though unfortunately Zephyrim did lose their reroll wound roll ability. +1 to wound is really nice, though this is pretty pricey to be honest. I'm not sure they're looking quite as efficient as a unit as before, as I don't think you'd really want to be using this every single turn. Next, for 1 command point, we have Exceptional Prophecy. This gives Celestians +1 to hit, and it does include things like the Celestian Sacrosancts or the Paragon Warsuits. Simple and effective, and you can push it on quite a hefty damage dealing unit. For 1 command point we have Extremist Trigger Word, and this amps up Arco Flagellants. It allows you to get 3 Arco Flail attacks instead of 2, giving you a massive 6 strength 5 AP -1 attacks for every single Arco-Flagellant in the squad. Really powerful, though it does give them a 1 in 6 chance of dying after they do the attack. Still though, it seems pretty good for the damage output just for 1 command point. Next we have Suffer Not the Witch, 1 command point which gives you +1 to hit against Psykers, and +1 to hit and wound if you happen to be a character model. Maybe could be particularly nice if you've got more than Val on the go. I'd imagine she could be a pretty hefty threat even to Demon Primarchs between both that and her other buffs. Next we come to Epic Deeds, 2 command points for Divine Intervention. This is one to allow a character to resurrect when they die. You spend 1 to 3 miracle dice and they stay alive with that many wounds remaining. Not too bad at all if you do have an absolutely key character that you need to get another turn out of next to the enemy. For 1 command point we have Fiery Oratory. This allows the priest to cast any war hymn it knows, provided it didn't use it in the command phase, and it could be quite a handy one for any priest arriving from reserve or maybe getting out of a transport. The hymn goes off automatically as well, so if you absolutely need to get 1 war hymn down, then it could be a way to make that more reliable. Martyr's Immolation is the same, 1 command point to auto-explode the Immolator. Definitely handy if it's getting up close and personal with those flamers. Rites of Restoration is a new one for the Hospitaller. They heal D3 Adeptus Ministorum core infantry, and they come back with 4 wounds if that's relevant. It's basically combat revival for the Space Marines, except you get more sisters back because they generally tend to be not as many points. Could definitely be worth it on something like Sacrosancts perhaps. For 1 command point we have Martyred, which allows you to gain 1 miracle dice when a character is killed, in addition to the one that you'd normally get, but if it happens to be your Warlord, you get D3 plus 1 miracle dice instead. Certainly could help lessen the blow. Moment of Grace is slightly changed. It's still 1 command point and expends some miracle dice to add 1 to your saving throw per miracle dice, but now you can only do it with 1 or 2 miracle dice, not 3. Still could be pretty nice to tank a very hefty damage shot and maybe allow something to survive that shouldn't really. Finally for Epic Deeds we have Suffering and Sacrifice, 1 command point for your Warlord or Living Saint, and it means that the enemy unit must make all their attacks against that unit. They can't attack any other sisters units that happen to be in combat. Perhaps could allow one of your fighting melee units to get into a really nasty character or something, if you are willing to pay the price of them easily killing your Warlord. We then have the standard stratagems for Open the Reliquaries and Saint in the Making. They're the extra Warlord Traits and Relic stratagems, just the same as they are in the other codexes in 9th. And there's a Sacred Burden as well. This is the one to give a Sister Superior a relic. She can either take the Blessings of Sebastian Thor, Ecclesiarch's Fury, Litanies of Faith, or Redemption. We'll get onto those in the Relics section. We then have Strategic Ploys. Angelic Ascent is a jump pack unit going back into Deep Strike Reserve. It has to stay off the board until the next movement phase though, so basically a turn off the board. Battle Rites for 1 command point allows the Sororitas Warlords to roll a dice for a new Sacred Rites and then change it out for one of your active ones. Maybe it could be good if you roll 2 and then they turn out to be very weak. We then have Deadly Descent, the one that allows Seraphim to shoot again on the turn that they come in from Deep Strike. Unfortunately, this one's taken a big nerf. It used to give Inferno pistols an extra 6-inch range, so they could actually be fired when they jumped down. Now, unfortunately, it does not, so just for raw damage, you're going to get the most use out of it by taking max Ministorum hand flamers and then a bunch of bolt pistol shots. Their anti-infantry damage will get fairly impressive out of that. For a 90-point unit and using that stratagem, that'd average you a pretty impressive 36 strength 4 hits right out of Deep Strike. Next we have Defenders of the Faith, a 2 CP one that you do at the end of your movement phase, and you do it on a big important Battle Sisters squad. They get to rapid fire their bolters all the way out to 24 inches, even if they've moved, and that works with those Artificer Storm bolters as well. And they can also only be wounded on a 4+, so they could be really annoying to shift if they were on a midfield objective. It's a pretty powerful buff when sisters are only toughness 3 to start with. It's certainly a draw to take a big chunky 20-woman sister squad. Next up we have Desperate for Redemption. This one's changed a bit. Repentia don't get to fight twice anymore, but instead if any are killed before they get to swing in the fight phase, they get to fight one last time. It's a shame to lose the fighting twice, but this one still could be very handy. Repentia could be pretty easy to kill by an enemy charging unit. If you can guarantee them swinging one last time, then they might well just drag something important down with them. Next we have an Exorcist one. Devastating Refrain for 2 command points. This allows the Exorcist to fire its missile weapon with no line of sight. Now the ability to do this is actually really quite scary. Having 3d3 crack missile shots rain out of the sky is exactly what your opponent doesn't want when they're trying to hide something important out of line of sight. 2 command points is pricey, so you maybe want to do it as a luxury once or twice per game if it was really necessary, but I would say that this is now the main draw to taking the Exorcist. and the only long range ignores line of sight ability in the Sisters Codex. I would feel a lot better about it if it was just 1 command point rather than 2 though. Next we have Holy Rage for 1 or 2 command points. It's 1 command point if you're within 6 inches of a priest, or 2 command points otherwise. It's kind of 2 stratagems in one. Either you can use it to gain Zealot, so re-rolling all hits in the first round of combat. Could be pretty handy on a combat unit that isn't near something for re-rolls. Or you can use it to gain a Fanatic ability, which allows them to fall back and charge something else. Both potentially very useful, and definitely an incentive to keep a priest around. Final Redemption for 1 command point is the old Mortifier ability. It can now be used on either of the Engine of Redemption units, that's Mortifiers or Penitent engines, and when they're destroyed in melee, there's a 4+ chance to deal D3 mortal wounds to the unit that killed them. They're not all that hard to remove, so if it does look like you're about to have a unit of 3 of them scrubbed, this could be well worth a CP. Next, for 1 command point, we have Judgment of the Faithful. This allows a core unit to fall back and shoot. Seems perhaps a slightly surprising one for the Sisters to have access to, but it certainly helps incentivize bolter-wielding sister units. Again, could be great value on a really big 20-woman sister squad, but even just having this about for Retributors being tagged or other things is kind of handy as well. Between this and Holy Rage, you could have fall back, shoot and charge if you really wanted to. Finally, for strategic ploys, we have Righteous Impact. These are impact hits from either Paragon suits or Engines of Redemption. For each one that gets inside engagement range, you roll off against the enemy toughness, and if that roll equals or exceeds their toughness, they get 1 mortal wound, or D3 mortal wounds on an unmodified roll of a 6. Not terrible if you're charging against something that you really don't know whether or not you'll be able to kill with your own combat abilities. Finally, we round off with 5 Wargear stratagems, the first one of which is Blessed Bolt, and it looks very nice indeed. You use it on the units that have those Artificer crafted Storm Bolters, and on every unmodified hit roll of a 6, you get 2 mortal wounds, and the attack sequence ends. You can get a maximum of 6 mortal wounds this way. To be honest, this one's really quite easy to deploy. A Dominion squad with 4 of those Artificer Storm Bolters will give you 16 shots when you're up and close. That's a very good chance indeed to get the flat 6 mortal wounds for 1 command point, which is just really good value for 1 command point, never mind the actual damage that their Storm Bolters do beside that. I think this one's going to be quite popular, with just how easy you can spam mortal wounds against an enemy. Next we have Holy Smokescreen, the standard smokescreen one, which gives you -1 to hit if you target a Rhino chassis vehicle. Holy Trinity is back for 1 command point, and works the same. The whole unit must target 1 enemy unit. If you use 1 bolter, 1 flamer and 1 melter weapon, they all get +1 to wounds. Again, maybe easiest to use on a squad like Dominions, maybe pack 4 melters or flamers or something, and then take a combi melter or flamer on the superior, that way you have all 3 different weapons. Strength 5 flamers with +1 to wound would scare hordes, and melters with +1 to wound certainly scares tanks. Next we have Inviolate Shield Wall for 1 command point. This allows your Sacrosancts or Crusaders to be -1 to wound in melee. A really nice defensive buff, that one. I could most certainly see that being used on a big unit of Sacrosancts. Finally, we have an interesting one for the Rhino chassis vehicles. The Thrice Blessed Hull for 1 command point you use at the start of the opponent's psychic phase, presuming they put a Psyker within 12 inches of one of your Rhino tanks. It means that every time they fail to cast a psychic power, they will then suffer perils of the warp. Could be very scary indeed to the right army, say if you have a few Rhinos moving forward against Grey Knights or Thousand Sons. Hopefully at least could be good for a few mortal wounds on the Psykers. Overall, quite a lot of interesting stratagems here. It is a bit sad to see that some of the useful ones have gone, things like the one for longer Retributor range and advance and charge for any unit, but a lot of them still seem very good and pretty fun to use. I think Cleansed by Fire, the Flamer one for 2 command points looks great. Easier hits on Celestians will come up a lot. Deadly Descent with those Seraphim and Hand Flamers looks nice. And Fall Back and Shoot and Fall Back and Charge are both really handy abilities to have and really punishes your opponent when they're trying to get you locked in combat. Next up we come to the Warlord Traits. There are 6 standard ones, in addition to all the ones that you get from the orders. Inspiring Orator gives you +3 inch to the range of hymns, command phase abilities, and a 6-inch aura of no combat attrition modifiers if the squads are less than half strength. I guess not bad for a little bit of flexibility of command, maybe could be handy on a Dog Martyr, maybe brought in as an extra Warlord trait. Next we have Righteous Rage. This allows you reroll hits and wounds in melee. It's a spectacular melee buff and will be excellent on any fight you canoness. Pair this with the Blade of St. Eleanor for an absolute combat monster that's going to stack a whole load of damage on the enemy. This one just so happens to be Morven Val's Warlord trait though, and it's a monstrously good one for her combat abilities. She's got a massive amount of general purpose attacks, the ability to fight twice, and it means that she's just going to be a complete wrecking ball into whatever she gets into. Whoever takes it, this one seems like a very solid option. Next we have Executioner of Heretics. This is a 6-inch aura of -1 leadership and -1 combat attrition. Every Elstone gets that. It's not a bad leadership debuff, but leadership debuffs in general are quite weak. Beacon of Faith gets you an extra miracle dice each turn, but I'm afraid this one has been heavily nerfed. The miracle dice that you generate with this can only be used on the Warlord themselves. You can't just spend it freely over the whole army. I think in reality that means it's going to get passed up a bit. This change is one of the biggest reasons that miracle dice are a bit more squeezed now. Indomitable Belief though is a really good buffing one. Core infantry from the same order gets +1 to their Shield of Faith save, caps at a maximum of 4+, and it's a good one to have in the middle of a Sisters battle line. Sisters with a 5+ invul save are a lot harder to shift than those without. I think that one's going to get run quite a lot. Finally we have Pure of Will. This one's an anti-psyker one. It gets you an extra Shield of Faith denial, and it gives you +3 to your Deny the Witch test. It means that you should have a reasonable shot of denying psychic powers, even if you don't look out and get that 6 on the Shield of Faith. Overall, I'd say Indomitable Belief for the extra invuls and Righteous Rage for the better melee are the best pick out of these. Moving on, we get to the Relic section, and there's now really quite a few to choose from. The Relic Blessed Blade is now called the Blade of Saint Eleanor. It's otherwise unchanged and is AP -3 and very strong indeed. The Brazier of Eternal Flame gives the bearer -1 to hit for demons and makes Psyker's Perils on any doubles within 12 inches, though I think that's a bit close to be effective really. The Wrath of the Emperor is a rapid fire bolt pistol, 4 shots at 18 inches, strength 5, AP -1 and damage 2. Kind of okay if you're getting multiple rounds of fire off with it, though never going to change the world really. Litanies of Faith allow you to reroll a miracle dice once per battle round. Should give you a fair few more of those all-important high results. The Mantle of the Ophelia is for canonesses only. When suffering damage, they never take more than 1 wound per attack, so that means that you're actually going to have to put quite a lot of effort into chewing through a canoness. Normally that's going to mean a minimum of 5 attacks, even if they happen to be las cannons or something. As defensive relics go, that one does seem quite good. Next we have the Triptych of the Macarian Crusade. It's for either Sanctified or Cult Imperialis models. It gives them +1 toughness, a 4+ invul, and the first time that you fail a save per turn, the damage characteristic goes to 0. Certainly makes a Ministorum Priest a lot tougher. The Book of St. Lucius gives you +3 inches to aura abilities. I think that will still get taken quite a bit. Seems certainly fine on a Canoness or a Palatine. Could be really good on something like the Hospitaller. Now she has an aura ability for a Feel No Pain. The Iron Surplice is for a Sororitas model. You get +1 wound, only be able to be wounded on a 4+ and a 2+ armor save. Again, that's just going to be all around harder to kill. Only being able to be wounded on a 4+ is great on a toughness 3 model. It just needs to be on something that's actually worth protecting. The Ecclesiarch's Fury is a relic chainsword. It interestingly gets -1 to hit but +1 to wound, and strength +2, AP -3 and damage 2. That means it's even going to be wounding things like toughness 8 models on a 4+. Just for raw combat ability, it does seem fairly close on par with the Blade of Saint Eleanor. Next we have Redemption, a Sororitas model with a plasma pistol. It just counts as the overcharged mode and doesn't have the chance to overheat, and it gets a weird sort of beam effect where you draw a line towards your target unit and any enemy units on the way also get hit provided you hit the target unit. Kind of fun, but I don't think it's really worth it. The Sigil Ecclesiasticus allows you to double down on a war hymn. You pick a priest model, it knows 1 extra war hymn, and it can recite 1 more war hymn. This one seems like an auto-include to me, provided you're running something like a Dialogus or a Dogmata. The Blessings of Sebastian Thor allow you to choose 2 sacred rites at the start of the game, and they can be different to the rest of the army's ones. I guess that could in theory be helpful if you've mainly got a shooting army and you want to take the shooting sacred rite, and then you could get both combat ones on 1 unit. Exploding 6s and +1 to charge seems pretty good for 1 command point investment. This one is one of the ones you can take with a Sister Superior. Next we have Simulacrum Sanctorum. The Imagify gets an extra tail to recount. Unfortunately the tail of the Stoic went from being really good to really bad, but you could maybe get reroll charges and +1 strength out of 1 character, which isn't too bad at all. Finally we have the Chaplet of Sacrifice. This one's a weird mixed one. It allows you to use 1 epic deed for 0 command points. You get to reroll all your hit rolls, and when the model is killed you get to either shoot or fight in death. Maybe this one is one that's deliberately meant for a sacrificial character of some sort. Get maximal damage before they die, and when they do die you get even more. For me there seem to be quite a lot of tempting picks in the relic section. The blade or that chainsword both seem good for a fighty canoness. The Book of St. Lucius is hard to ignore for buffing characters. The Sigil is amazing for priests, making them twice as effective, and Simulacrum could be good for an Imagifier. I think you could potentially find roles for quite a lot of them, depending on what list you're playing. So next let's talk about these new war hymns. These are the ones that can be used by priest keyword units, and these are the standard Ministoran ones, the Preacher and the Missionary, and the Dogmata and Dialogus out of the Sisters units. As with the Space Marine Chaplain, there's the basic one called War Hymn, and then there's 6 others to choose from. The cheap Preacher only knows War Hymn, Missionary models know War Hymn and one of the first 3, and the Dialogus and Dogmata can know War Hymn and then pick one freely from the rest of the list. Unless they're buffed, they can only recite 1 hymn each round though. As with Chaplain listeners, there are 3+ to cast, and they're cast in the command phase. It does mean that they're a bit unhelpful with arriving from reserves or getting out of transport vehicles, and they're also not that reliable to go off, as there's no way to make the war hymn casters more reliable. If you really need one to go off, you could use that 1 command point 1 to use a war hymn out of phase. That's automatic, and you could use it after getting out of a transport. In any case, the basic war hymn is your standard extra attack one. You have to pick 1 single unit within 6 inches, either a core, character, or engine of redemption units, and they all get +1 attack. Going to have its most value with units with a small amount of very hard hitting attacks, I think. It'll still be solid on units like Repentia, or perhaps those new Sacrosancts. Next we have the Refrain of Blazing Piety. That one's kind of like a mini smite within 12 inches. You pick the enemy unit affected, and it gets D3 mortal wounds, or 3 if it's chaos. I'm not sure if it's quite worth it for the character cost, but it's certainly quite fun. Maybe not a bad one to go for if your priest is already doing its other job and you are taking that extra war hymn relic. Next we have the Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude. 1 core character or engine can't be affected by psychic powers, and any current effects of psychic powers ends. Good psychic defense, but not very take-all-comers for armies that don't have any psychers. The Psalm of Righteous Smiting is a self-buffing one. You get +1 strength, +1 attack, and your AP gets better by 1, though not relic weapons. On top of that, at the end of the fight phase, you can then fight again, provided you've survived. That could be really quite a powerful combination with the Dogmata, whose Mace of the Righteous is already really quite good, or maybe just combining with a relic anyway for that fight again ability. You could get some serious mileage out of the Ecclesiarch's Fury out of this. Next we have the Litany of Enduring Faith. A Sororitas core or character unit within 6 inches gets +1 to their Shield of Faith save, again capped at a maximum of 4+. That one could be really strong indeed. Maybe have a big brick of 20 strong sisters, have them in range of the Warlord trait for +1 to the save, and then stack them with this as well, and then you've suddenly got a 4+ invul save sisters unit. That's not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. We then have the Verse of Holy Piety. A Sororitas core character unit within 6 inches gets an additional Sacred Rite. Maybe it could be nice to get the extra range on charges, or exploding 6s to hit in melee, though I guess there's a good chance that you're going to have picked the one that you really wanted at the start of the game anyway. Finally we have the Catechism of Repugnance, a bolter buffing one. 1 core or character unit within 6 inches gets AP -1 better on their bolters, and also any 6s to hit will auto wound the enemy. I could imagine something like a Dogmata with this and the Litany of Enduring Faith, both buffing 1 solid brick of 20 woman sister squads. Potentially having a 4+ invul and AP -1 bolters that wound a bit better seems great to me. Overall, I think the war hymns are pretty interesting. Maybe the standard war hymn isn't anywhere near as good as the standard priest buffing aura used to be, but I think that the invul buff, the bolter buff, and even the self-buffing power looks quite interesting. It could be pretty fun to send a sister's character into absolute rage mode and kill something far better than she really has any right to. Finally, for our character buffs, we get to the Blessings of the Faithful section, and this one's the paid for in points bonus. You can apply the buff to canonesses or palatines only, and each of the buffs has a passive ability and a miraculous ability. You have to activate the miraculous ability with a miracle dice. Again, this is a mechanic that's only open to whole army Sisters of Battle armies, but apparently you are allowed to take an auxiliary support, super heavy auxiliary, and fortifications in the list. It is interesting that you could still gain access to these even if you took an Imperial Knight as an ally. In any case, there are 6 abilities, ranging from 40 points down to 15 points. Each of the miraculous part of the abilities can only be activated once per game. You expend a miracle dice to determine the range of that miraculous ability. For expending a 1, you get a 1-inch range. Anywhere between a 2 to 5, you get a 3-inch range, and expending a 6 gets you a big 6-inch range. Yet more pressure on those amazing 6 miracle dice. The first one we have is Word of the Emperor for 40 points, so really quite a hefty upgrade on a canoness this one. As per standard, you get 1 unit within 3 inches getting a Fight Last debuff. Not at all bad against preventing interruption, whether you're charging or being charged. Certainly wouldn't hurt to have that on some sort of fighty canoness on the front lines. The Miraculous ability is a really powerful one as well, and it's probably why this costs so many points. Basically, enemy units that are in miracle range can't take invuls in melee against order core or character models. Ideally, you want your Canoness to be within range of the enemy units, then charge them with something nasty from your sister's arsenal, perhaps Repentia, Sacrosanct, or Paragon Warsuits, and hopefully they'll just be able to melt them away as the enemy has no invul saves to resist their attacks. Really powerful, could cast straight through an enemy unit with storm shields or something. Next we have Rapturous Blows, 25 points, and it helps out the Canoness herself a bit with +1 strength and +1 damage to any non-relic melee weapons. To be honest, that's already kind of amazing on a Blessed Blade. That'll get you up to strength 6 and damage 3. Could be even better than the relic one if you'd rather pay the points, and it gives you the option of stacking with a different relic as well. The Miraculous ability means that order core character units in miracle range cause 1 mortal wound in melee on every wound roll of a 6. Again, I really like that buff, it's solid extra power to the melee units around you. Could be say an extra 4 mortal wounds on a big unit of Repentia fighting perhaps. Overall, I think that Rapturous Blows is perhaps one of the best. 25 points a pretty good investment for a frontline Canoness. Next up, Divine Deliverance is cheap at 15 points. If your Canoness happens to be within 6 inches of an enemy character in the opponent's command phase, you roll 3d6, and if you beat their leadership, they lose 1 aura ability. It's only for 1 turn, and I've no doubt that then your Canoness might well just get killed by whatever powerful character she was trying to debuff, but I suppose it could be quite funny to ruin the command abilities of something like a Primarch. The Miracle ability is for order core and character models within miracle range to modify enemy leadership by -1 for every casualty that they inflict on them. Again, that's quite a powerful one as leadership debuffs go, though I think it might be a little bit clunky and awkward to pull off. Maybe on something like Paragon Warsuits or a Retributor squad might be the best option. Overall though, I don't think it's amazingly strong. Next we have the Emperor's Grace for 20 points. Just as standard, the model will heal d3 wounds per turn. Could be quite nice combined with that trait that makes the Canoness only take 1 damage at a time. And the Miracle ability is quite a nice defensive buff. Order core and character units within range mean that your opponent can't re-roll dice to hit, wound or damage when they target the models. Lots of abilities grant rerolls, and that could add up to a fair few sisters' lives saved. Again, perhaps not terrible for 20 points, could make the core of the battle line a bit more durable for a turn. Next we have Righteous Judgment, 25 points. It allows your ranged attacks to ignore Lookout Sir and cause 1 mortal wound on every roll of 6 to wound. I guess this is perhaps best paired with a Condemner bolt gun. In theory, this could allow you to put some mortal wounds on Psykers, even if they're right in the middle of the enemy lines. Still though, it's not going to be all that relevant if your opponent doesn't have any Psykers. The Miraculous ability allows order core and character models within miracle range to ignore cover with their ranged attacks. I'm not really sure that's quite worth it at 25 points. Ignore cover is good and everything, but having to invest a miracle dice in it just doesn't seem amazing. Finally, we have Blinding Radiance for 30 points. This gives you a -1 to hit against the character at range, which is kind of a bit weak I think, but the main reason that you'd buy it is that it makes any order core and character units within miracle range -1 to hit for the turn that you use that Miraculous ability. Overall, I'd say that these things do seem okay, though I'm not sure they're absolutely amazingly stand out. You do pay a fairly respectable amount of points for the abilities that they give. Just at first glance, I think that perhaps Rapturous Blows might be one of the best options. It combines making your Canoness quite a lot fightier, as if she had a relic basically, and also has quite a nice easy to deploy offensive buff, as who doesn't like getting a whole load of mortal wounds with a sisters unit on the charge. Word of the Emperor does seem powerful, but it is quite pricey at 40 points. I'd take these as interesting list building options, though I wouldn't see any of them as auto-include mandatory picks. Next, let's go through the orders of the Sisters of Battle, and as before we have 6 big ones, and then we have the custom order ones that we can make, much like Space Marine successor chapters. Starting out, we have the Order of Our Martyr Lady. They allow you to generate a fair few more miracle dice, so if you do want to play with the miracle dice mechanic quite a bit, it could be worth a look. If any of your units are destroyed in a phase, you gain an extra miracle dice, and you also get +1 to hit if the unit that's targeted is below starting strength. 2 reasonable options, and they're definitely going to have a more infantry focus than vehicles, as they want to take some small casualties here and there. Their trait, Shield Bearer, gives them -1 damage, and if the character is killed or kills a unit, the miracle dice they generate from that automatically becomes a precious 6. I'm not sure I'd really take that over the standard picks, to be honest. Martyr's Vengeance is their relic. It's a relic Inferno pistol with 12-inch range, a big strength 9, AP -4, and a massive damage d6 +3. Most of the time relic shooting weapons aren't really worth bothering with, but this is a really quite massive upgrade. Just knowing that you could theoretically vaporize a 9 wound model in one single shot is quite cool. If the Canonist is going to be venturing forward, then it could be worth a look. Finally, we have 1 command point for Honor the Martyrs. This means that if one of your characters dies, you get +1 to wound against the unit that killed it. +1 to wound is an amazing offensive buff. It might encourage you to go a little bit heavier on the support characters, and if your opponent does manage to take them out, then one of their units is going to get very easy to kill indeed. A little bit situational perhaps, but when it goes off on the right unit, this could be really strong. Overall, I'd say that they seem solid enough, though perhaps a little bit disparate in what they want to try and achieve, maybe a slightly hard order to build around and try and maximise. Next we have Valorous Heart, the Durability Sisters. Their order conviction was tweaked a little bit. They improved their save by 1 whenever they're hit by AP-1 or AP-2 weapons. It means that 3+ armor is going to be quite resilient against most things, and they also get a 5+ shrug off against mortal wounds, though they do lose their standard built-in 6-up feel no pain save. A bit of a side grade, probably a little bit weaker than they were. Their trait, Impervious to Pain, is a 5+ feel no pain type save, and you can also heal 1 wound when you use Acts of Faith. Not really any more strong than the durability relics you can get. Their relic, the Casket of Penance, is really quite an interesting one. For enemy units within 3 inches, they get -1 toughness, and Chaos get -1 strength as well. If you can deliver a Canoness right up to the enemy, this will make one of the enemy units really easy to kill. Space Marines are going to melt your bolt of fire and combat attacks when they're only toughness 3, and it could be really nice on things like toughness 8 Knights or Mortarion, dropping down to toughness 7. A pretty strong relic, the main downside being that you have to put a character right on the front line to get the benefit. Finally, Blind Faith for 1 command point allows you to ignore modifiers when you make a unit attack. It seems to be both in the shooting phase and fight phase now, so it could be pretty good for Repentia, ignoring that -1 to hit, or Retributors when they're moving and shooting, as unfortunately they did lose their move and shoot for no penalty. Overall, Valorous Heart still seem pretty good though. A bit of extra durability on the standard sisters with the AP thing. Blind Faith seems pretty handy to have around, and the Casket of Penance seems useful. Next we have the Bloody Rose, the nastiest melee sisters around. In the first round of combat, they get +1 attack, and their AP is better by -1, though they no longer get extra AP on pistols. It's really hard to go wrong with these. They take any sister's melee unit up a notch, and are particularly good when they combine that with the Exploding Six's Sacred Rites. With all the sisters' combat units now available in the book, I suspect they still might be the go-to competitive order. Their Warlord trait is Blazing Ire. They get +1 attack again, and advance and charge. Could be nice to pair with the Blade of Admonition, or maybe that Rapturous Blows Blessing of the Faithful. Their relic Chainsword Beneficence has been nerfed a bit though. It's now Strength +2, AP -2, only 1 damage, though it does give you an extra 3 attacks and an extra D3 +3 if there's at least 6 enemy models within 3 inches. Losing damage 2 was a bit of a nerf to this though. It means it isn't really an all-round blender close combat weapon, it's very much anti-infantry now. Finally, Tear Them Down for 1 command point has changed a bit, though it remains very strong. It now means that your 6s to hit will also wound the enemy, which in general isn't going to be quite as strong as +1 to wound, though it remains absolutely excellent on Sisters Repentia due to the combination of only hitting on 4s anyway, and the fact that they get reroll hits built in with Zealot. Against hard targets, it actually seems as strong or stronger on the Repentia, so I've no doubt that it will continue to get used well on them. A full unit of Repentia with this stratagem charging in Bloody Rose should quite easily one-shot an Imperial Knight. They're definitely still a horrendous melee unit to fear. The 3 other orders were all a bit weak in my opinion, so it's quite good that they've got some extensive rewrites. Ebon Chalice gets a big buff to the Sacred Rites. You get to choose 2 rather than roll for 2. That means that you could combine the Exploding Sixes with the +1 to charge if you wanted. They won't be quite as powerful a melee order compared with Bloody Rose, but they will get into combat a little bit more reliably perhaps. Additionally, they retain their mechanic of discarding an additional miracle dice to make another one into a 6 when you use an Act of Faith. Pretty nice when you want a long charge or to make a crucial saving throw. Their trait is Terrible Knowledge. The first miracle dice that you generate will be an automatic 6, and you get to regenerate command points on a 5+. I quite like that one. If you are playing Ebon Chalice, it really makes sense to have it on the table. Their relic is the Enunciation of the Creed, a relic Condemner bolt gun, with the Condemner stake shot being a 24 inches assault 1, strength 4, AP -2 and damage 2. It can target enemy characters freely, and it does a massive automatic 3 mortal wounds to enemy psychers if it hits. That's some serious anti-psyker technology on the table there. Again, if you are playing Ebon Chalice, I think it would make sense to have that relic about. You won't be playing psychers every game, but when you do, you'll be popping them dead left, right and centre. Finally, their stratagem is Cleansing Flames. They used to get the one with the max flamer hit. Now this one is instead a Mortal Wounds flamer attacks, where for 1 command point a squad adds plus 4 inches to their flamer range, and any wound roll of 4+ causes 1 mortal wound to the maximum of 3 mortal wounds for the squad. You only need a couple of flamers to average the 3 mortal wound cap on this, so it's pretty easy if you just wanted an extra bit of damage output. Between getting mortal wounds and a bunch of strength 4 or 5 hits, this is going to be pretty powerful. Overall, I think that Ebb and Chalice are really quite a strong order. Better melee, CP regeneration, an anti-psycho weapon, and a very nice flamer stratagem. I feel like they're likely to see some play. Next we have Argent Shroud, which seem to incentivize you to play shooting multiple small units of sisters. They now counter stationary whether they've moved or advanced in the shooting phase, which means that you could have 5 woman sister squads with a multi-melter in, all zipping around, moving and advancing, and then still being able to fire at full accuracy. To double down on the melter buffs, they also get to reroll 1 hit roll or 1 wound roll every time a squad attacks, a solid damage buff over the entire army, particularly good with very high strength weapons such as multi-melters. If you're going to field Retributor squads, then Argent Shroud seems to be the best place to do so. They can jump out of transports and fire at full accuracy, though they won't be able to come in from Strategic Reserve and do that as per the new rulebook FAQ. Their trait Selfless Heroism gives them a 6-inch heroic intervention and always fights first, a pretty helpful combo if it goes. If you are doing a fighty canoness, it could be worse. The Quicksilver Veil gives them plus 3 inches to movement and -1 to hit the bearer. I guess could be worse for a buffing character that you need to move about a lot and also you want to have protectors. And for 1 command point, Faith as Our Shield really messes with mortal wound attacks. It gives the unit that you use it on a 4+ feel no pain against them. It'll basically halve the damage output of anything that was mortal wound related coming in on that unit. Overall, Argent Shrouds seem interesting. The main reason to take them will be their trait. Very fast moving, heavy weapon firing sisters seems like it's one of the best ways that you can build a more ranged focused sisters army. Finally, last but not least, we get to Sacred Rose. They auto-pass combat attrition, but far more importantly, regenerate miracle dice on the roll of a 4+ every time you use one for an act of faith. That's going to lead to quite a lot of extra miracle dice over the course of the game. Their Warlord Trait Light of the Divine allows them to get an automatic 6 for any acts of faith that are used for them personally, and also a 6-inch aura of Fall Back and Shoot. I'd say the Fall Back and Shoot is maybe the most important of the two, in the middle of a sister's gun line. Their relic is the Light of St. Agnetha, a brazier of holy fire that's multi-use. You'll average around about 1.75 mortal wounds per turn if you can keep them within 12 inches. Not nothing, but you do need to get up close and personal. And finally, the Emperor's Judgment for 1 command point will give you exploding 6s when shooting. Quite nice that this isn't locked to core units or anything. You could use it on Castigators or Exorcists perhaps. Overall, out of the orders, they all seem a bit more balanced and more playable. I still think that Bloody Rose potentially seems like the strongest to me, but different ones encourage different play styles, particularly Ebon Chalice, Argent Shroud and Valorous Heart all seem very interesting still. Moving on, we come to the Orders Minoris. If you don't want to pick one of these 6 big orders, then you can combine any 2 of these traits, basically in a very similar style to Space Marine Chapter Tactics. A few of them don't stack, but most of them you can freely pick and choose any. First up we have Shield of Aversion. AP-1 counts as AP0, kind of like a little bit of a worse version of Valorous Heart. It's not a bad durability buff, but it's going to be vastly more useful against certain armies compared with others. If your opponent doesn't have AP-1, then it's not going to do a lot. We have Hallowed Martyrs, +1 to hit if your squad's below starting strength, not too bad and part of the Order of Our Martyred Lady trait. Conviction of Faith allows you to reroll 1s for any miracle dice you generate, though the entire army must be this if you want this to benefit. It is quite a nice buff, though I'm not sure if it's worth giving up half a trait for. Devout Fanaticism is a serious melee buff. On the first round of combat, you get +1 to hit. That one's particularly solid with Repentia, who will be going to hitting on 3s re-rolling, so be really powerful on those chainswords, though it can't be stacked with Holy Wrath, the one that gives you extra AP. Guided by the Emperor's Will is a single re-roll to hit or wound every time a unit shoots or fights. That will add up to a fair bit more damage over the course of the game, and it's basically the same as half of the Argent Shrouds trait. Not too bad if you're packing a few small units with melter guns. Holy Wrath is the other combat-focused one that would really like to stack with Devout Fanaticism. This one makes your AP better by -1 in the first round of combat, quite similar to Bloody Rose. I guess it's not bad to amp up the combat potential of sisters a little bit while also getting something else, but if you want to run pure melee sisters, I think that Bloody Rose is perhaps best. In the Footsteps of Saints allows you to copy the order conviction of one of the main orders. Sadly, there's no real reason to take that compared with just running them as the main order, so I wouldn't bother unless it's just for fluff purposes. Perfervid Belief gives you half of the Ebon Chalice trait, discard an extra miracle dice to make one a 6. Purifying Recitations gives you +3 to deny the witch tests. It doesn't stack with any other modifiers to deny the witch, and makes your sister's army a serious anti-psyker threat. I would not like to play an army like this with Grey Knights or Thousand Sons. Righteous Suffering is a durability buff. Any unmodified 1s or 2s to wound always fail. Best on Toughness 3 sisters units. Anything that targets them that's a Strength 6 or better will mean that they can't wound quite as easily. It's a bit more relevant on low toughness sisters compared with toughness 4 Space Marines who can also get this trait. Slayers of Heretics gives you +1 to hit against characters. I don't think I'd bother with this one. Against some armies it's going to be really relevant, such as Character Knights or Demon Primarchs. Other ones maybe not. Unbridled Valor is +1 to combat attrition tests. I definitely wouldn't bother with that. And Witch Hunters is the other way that you can double down on killing Psykers. It allows you to reroll 1s to hit in melee against Psykers, and 1s to wound against Psyker characters as well. Again, it'll be very strong against Grey Knights or Thousand Sons, but kind of weak against the field. Finally, there are 3 weapon buff traits, 1 for Melters, 1 for Flamers, and 1 for Bolters. None of them can be taken with each other, but you can combine them with one of the other traits on the list. My favourite of these is the one that they previewed on Warhammer Community, Raging Fervour. It means that Melter Guns and Inferno Pistols will always count as being within half range, so you get the big D3 +2 damage, and any heavy melter weapons such as multi-melters will count as being half range all the way out to 18 inches. This is really relevant on Dominions with Melter Guns. They can happily jump out of a Rhino and then get D6 +2 wounds every time they get a shot through, and if you really wanted to double down on their damage output, you could combine that with the Guided by the Emperor's Will option to give them a single reroll as well. Very niche, and it's only going to buff part of your army, but if you're running allied sisters or a mix of different orders, then that could be very strong indeed. 4 Dominions jumping out of a Rhino with melter weapons does something like the average of 11 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle, even with no other buffs whatsoever. Otherwise, there's Rites of Fire, that gives you an extra 4-inch flamer range. Not really my favourite, to be honest. I guess it could make Immolators go extra far with those 18-inch flamers. But really now flamers are 12-inch range already, a buff to the range isn't quite as big as it was before. Obviously it's going to be quite good if you're spamming loads of flamer weapons though I don't think it's desperately strong otherwise. Finally, Unshakable Vengeance is the buff to bolt weapons. It means that you can ignore any hit roll or ballistic skill modifiers when you're firing with bolt weapons against the enemy. Perhaps notably most useful whenever you're moving and firing heavy bolters. It would certainly mean that heavy bolter retributors would be just that little bit more appealing, and could help counter things like dense cover, though for the vast majority of bolter shots in the army, this isn't usually going to have any big effect. Overall, I found a few of these interesting. I guess they're probably most interesting if you're just taking a few sisters units, or you want to just pick the absolute best traits to buff them to the max. Probably my favourite ones are Raging Fervour for the melter buffs, the extra damage by Guided for the Emperor's Will, and the 2 combat buffing traits, though I think that if you did want to run a pure melee army, then you might well be better off going Bloody Rose anyway. Before we get into datasheets, let's talk secondaries. And as normal, to access these you must be pure sisters, aside from Agents of the Imperium and unaligned models, and you can only choose one of these to substitute for one of your secondaries when you play a game. First up, we have a No Mercy No Respite one called A Leap of Faith. For this one you need to spam Acts of Faith all game long, and I'm afraid there is a mistake on the slide here. It's 1 victory point if you perform 2 Acts of Faith in a turn, 2 victory points if it was your opponent's turn, and you get +1 victory point if you manage to perform 3 in any given turn. Ones done with Incenser Cherubs don't count towards this, and you can score a max victory points of 12 victory points over the course of the whole game, even if you do manage to spam a few more. To do this, you'd kind of have to build around generating some miracle dice, and you would have to make sure that you're consistently using one each turn where possible, which might mean that occasionally you're going to be spending miracle dice when it doesn't really make sense to. Still though, this one seems very hard to counter. You could quite easily net 10 victory points with this, and your opponent wouldn't be able to do much about it. The main cost that you'd pay is that your miracle dice might not be quite as efficiently used. Might be a particularly good one for our Martyred Lady or Sacred Rose, who are tending to have miracle dice in abundance. Sacred Grounds is a shadow operations one. It allows an Adepta Sororitas infantry model or any priest model to do a consecrate objective action, which lasts from the end of your movement phase to the start of your next command phase, so essentially your opponent does have the chance to try and kill them while they're doing it. You must have no enemies nearby to start the action. You get 1 victory point for objectives entirely within your own drop zone, but 4 victory points if it's in the midfield or in the opponent's, and I believe you'd still get 4 victory points if it's on the edge of the drop zone. It says you only get 1 victory point if they're entirely within your own deployment zone. That could be surprisingly easy in certain missions, particularly if you have a couple of objective markers set up right in the edge of the drop zone. In addition, those objectives that you consecrate gain the Inspiring Terrain trait to nearby Adeptus Ministorum units. That could definitely be an option, though it might compete with that Raised Banners one. Next we have Slay the Heretic, a Purge the Enemy objective, and here you have to try and kill enemy units with bolt weapons, flamer weapons and melter weapons. Each shooting phase you have the option to get up to 1 victory point for killing an enemy unit with each of these, and if you manage to kill one enemy unit with all 3 of them, then you get a bonus victory point on top of that. In theory, you could get a maximum of 4 victory points per shooting phase with this. I think in reality that is going to be quite hard to achieve. I feel like this is an objective where you're near enough guaranteed to maybe get between 5 and 10 victory points, but are very unlikely to get any more than that. Definitely favours more shooting build lists as well, as opposed to melee ones. Finally, we have Defend the Shrine, which is a battlefield supremacy one. Your opponent has to nominate an objective that's not within their own deployment zone, and from there you have to try and take that objective. You get 3 victory points if you hold that objective at the end of your turn, and then at the end of the game, either you get an extra 3 victory points, or if your opponent holds it, then you get minus 3 victory points. I think this one really depends on the map that you're playing on and the opponent's army. If you think that you're going to be able to wrest control of the midfield for the vast majority of the game, it could be an easy way to pick up a bunch of points, provided the best objective that the opponent can pick is somewhere on the midfield and they aren't just going to be able to charge through and take it themselves. Overall, I think that these are quite well written secondaries. Most of them seem like fairly plausible picks in niche circumstances, though nothing jumps out as being absolutely easy to achieve. Perhaps that Sacred Grounds one seems like one of the best options if you have a lot of objectives and a lot of Sororitas infantry units running around. So let's get on to datasheets then. We'll go through the new datasheets first, then talk about the standard Battle Sister squad, and then go through everything that's changed for the rest of the Codex. First up, we have none other than Morven Val, the Supreme Commander of the Adepta Sororitas, and she does look like she's one of the strongest options in the entire book. She's an HQ choice, costing 265 points or 13 power, has the Supreme Commander tag, so she's easy to take, and she doesn't have any order, so it means that you can take her in any sister's army. An impressive stat line: Movement 8, Weapon Skill and Ballistic Skill 2+, Strength and Toughness 5, 8 wounds, 5 attacks, Leadership 9, a 2+ save and a 4+ invul to keep her safe. She is going to be really quite hard to remove. She also has a 4+ Feel No Pain against mortal wounds, and she halves any damage that she takes rounding up. So she's going to be really obnoxious to remove with any damage to weapons, and you're not going to be able to target her directly as she does have character protection. For her keywords, Paragon Warsuits do count as vehicles. She has that Sanctified trait, which means that she gets no order conviction, and she has the Paragon Warsuit tag. She's got all the standard Sisters of Battle rules, has the Explode special rule for 1 mortal wound within 6 inches, and if you take her, then she must be your Warlord as Supreme Commander of the Sisters. Her melee really is pretty monstrous. That Lance of Illumination can either do a sweep attack or a lunging strike. The sweep will be at strength 5, AP -2 and damage 1, but you get 10 attacks with it. The lunging strike will be strength +3, AP -3 and flat damage 3, and also any wound rolls of 6 cause 1 mortal wound. Not a bad start, but it certainly gets better. She's able to reroll all hits and wounds in melee with her Warlord trait, so she will pretty much be guaranteed max wounds against most things. And then on top of that, when she does engage, once per game you can fight again. That means that if she is against a big hitter, she will be able to inflict some incredibly heavy damage. If she gets to fight twice, in theory that's something like 20 wounds against an Imperial Knight without an invul save. Pretty mad for 265 points, particularly considering she has some ranged damage output and buffing ability as well. For her ranged weapons, she strikes with Fidelis, a heavy bolter with strength 6, otherwise nothing else unique about it, and a Paragon missile launcher, which is essentially a 36-inch range frag or crack missile launcher that gets 2 shots. Nothing excessive, but that will contribute a fair amount of firepower as she walks up, and she can potentially reroll wound rolls on that if she chooses to use her buffing ability on herself. Finally, talking of buffs, she has an aura that's basically a Canoness plus Palatine rolled into 1, so you get to reroll any 1s to hit and wound for core units within 6 inches. That can be for any order as well, which is kind of nice. And then she gets to nominate 1 Sororitas core or character unit. They get to reroll all hits and wounds, so kind of like the old style Guilliman rules. That's going to be great on literally anything really. If nothing else, then she can amp up her own shooting. Would be nice with multi-melter retributors, getting around hitting on 4s perhaps, a big blob of battle sisters with bolters, or maybe something like Repentia or Sacrosanct in melee. You can't really go too wrong with that buff. Overall, she's pretty amazing for 265 points. I'll guess that she'll be appearing in the vast majority of competitive sisters lists. Next up we come to the Celestian Sacrosancts, the new Shield and Combat Elites choice for 14 points each and squads of 5 to 10. They have the stat line of standard Celestians, except they get a 2+ save and a 4+ invul due to those shields. For 14 points that's really quite durable. Anything that's damage 1 will go through them at least fairly quickly still, but damage 2 or 3 weapons will feel kind of wasted against them. They do have the Celestian keyword, which allows them access to the stratagem for +1 to hit. Each sister's armed with a melee weapon, a bolt pistol and frag and crack grenades, and that melee weapon is either a hallowed mace, strength +2, AP -1 and damage 2. Sorry, small typo on the slide there, the mace is definitely AP -1, not AP -2. And the anointed halberd is strength +3, AP -3, but only damage 1. Out of the two, I kind of like the maces most, particularly if you're running them in Bloody Rose, which will get them up to AP -2 anyway. For upgrades, the Sister Superior can take a Spear of the Faithful. It costs 5 points for strength +3, AP -3 and damage 2. That seems like a well worthwhile upgrade to me, as will be killing Space Marines so easily. And the Sister Superior can also replace their bolt pistol with a hand flamer or a Inferno pistol. Finally, they have a few special rules. Keepers of the Faith allows them to heroically intervene. This is really nice for a frontline durable unit. Park them on an objective and they'll defend it against all comers. If someone charges them, they can also get +1 to hit when they're charged or heroically intervening. They basically get to set to defend for free. They have a bodyguard rule, meaning that you can't shoot characters within 3 inches of them. And then all the standard Sisters rules, Acts of Faith, Shield of Faith and Sacred Rites. Overall, these look very solid. Kind of as expected, will be fulfilling the role similar to Necron Lichguard or Space Marine Blade Guard. Not desperately fast, but pretty durable and hard-hitting in melee. Again, I think that these will see a lot of play, particularly in Bloody Rose armies. Next we have the Paragon Warsuits, again an Elite's choice, and they had a couple of misprints here. I believe it's 240 points for the squad of 3, though they have listed it per model, and you can only take the 3 of them, you can't take any more or less. They've got an interesting stat line, 8-inch movement, weapon skill and ballistic skill 3+, strength and toughness 5, 4 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 8 and a 2+ save, but only their Shield of Faith 5+ invul. The Sister Superior does get +1 attack. Durability wise, that isn't amazing for 80 points. They do have a special rule that's -1 damage, and there's another misprint on this one here. They haven't capped it to say a minimum of 1, like every other special rule that's similar to this in the game. That means that technically they're functionally immune to any small arms fire right now, though that will absolutely definitely get FAQs. That will protect them quite well against damage 2 weapons, but any serious anti-tank weapons, things like Drakari Lances or Admech Cognis autocannons, are just going to go straight through these and bring them down very efficiently indeed. Keywords wise, again they're Celestians, so they can get +1 to hit, which could be handy either at range or in melee, and each suit is equipped with a melee weapon, 2 storm bolters, a bolt pistol, frag and crack grenades, and a ranged weapon in its left hand. For the melee weapons, you have the choice of a Paragon Warblade or a Paragon War Mace. The Warblade is strength 6, AP -3, flat damage 2, and you get +1 attack, best at killing hordes and elite infantry. The War Mace will do hefty damage to the heavy hitters, strength 9, AP -2, a flat damage of 3, but -1 to hit to go along with that. Either way, if you can get them into combat, they'll be dealing hefty damage. For their ranged weapons, you get the choice of either a Heavy Bolter, a Ministorum Heavy Flamer, or a Multi-Melter in their left hand. The Multi-Melter costs +10 points, and then they can choose either a pair of Storm Bolters or a 2-shot 24-inch crack grenade launcher as their secondary weapon system mounted on their carapace. Out of those, I think I'd be tempted by the Storm Bolters just for all of that volume fire. Overall, they seem pretty hard-hitting both at range and in melee. My main concern with them is just having them shot straight off the table. Even with -1 damage, they don't really seem all that durable for the points. As core units go though, they are a really massive core unit. You can get a lot of value out of a lot of buffs on them. Next up we have the Castigator, which I did make a full video review about, so feel free to check that out if you'd like to see more. It's a heavy support choice for 160 points or 9 power. If you take the Battle Cannon, it costs 5 points more. It has the stat line of a basic Predator tank with a 6+ invul, degrades as normal, and has the hallowed vehicle and smokescreen keywords which allow it to use those stratagems for the Rhino chassis tanks. The autocannons are heavy 43, strength 7, AP -1 and damage 2 shots. quite generalist, not particularly standout, and the Castigator Battle Cannon has a Sanctified or Pyro Shell. The Sanctified Shell is 72 inches, heavy d6, strength 9, AP 3 and flat damage 3. Not too bad for popping some tanks at extreme range, and the Pyro Shell is heavy 3d3, strength 6, AP 1, damage 1, and ignores cover. Out of the two, I think I slightly prefer the Battle Cannon, though it is quite nice to have access to some strength 7 weapons if you do want to build in a bit more light vehicle hunting capacity for the Sisters' army. In addition, it also gets 3 heavy bolters and the option for a Storm Bolter or Hunter Killer missile. In general, it seems that the damage output is okay for the points. It's not enormously durable, and it does seem that you're paying a bit of a premium for the longish range on the tank. Most Sisters units need to get a bit closer at 24-inch range to be effective, so it does give it a bit of a niche, and it's maybe a little bit better in terms of damage output compared with the Exorcist, I think. Probably not all that competitive, as it's quite easy to take out, but still a cool new option to have. Next we have Astrid Thurger and Agathe Dolan, an elite's choice for 90 points for the pair. It's a 2-model character unit, and the two give all sorts of benefits for the Sisters' army. They make the first extra relic that you take free. The Auto Tapestry gives you a once per game ability, where all core units within 6 inches get all 6 Sacred Rites active for a turn. It's not too bad, but I would say that all the buffs are just a little bit minor, and for a once a game signature ability, it isn't really all that amazing. Agathe, the Scribe, must tank wounds first for Astrid, and she gets to buff one character within 9 inches, and they get to reroll a single dice to hit, wound or damage. In melee, Agathe isn't going to do all that much, but Astrid isn't too bad with her Blade of Vigil, strength +2, AP 3 and flat damage 2, and it ignores any rules that ignore wounds, things like feel no pain type saves, or caps on how many wounds you can take in a single turn. In terms of Sisters support characters, the slot choices really are quite crowded, to be honest. I don't think I'd personally invest in this pair compared with some of the priest options or the other characters that provide all-game buffs. Speaking of which, the last of the units that we haven't seen the datasheet before is the Dogmata. She again is an elite's choice for 65 points, and that honestly surprised me a bit. I thought she was going to be an HQ, a bit similar to Space Marine Chaplains. She has a fairly standard Sisters buffing character profile, 4 wounds and 3 attacks, and is a Sororitas character with a priest keyword, and is armed with the Mace of the Righteous and Frag and Crack grenades. That Mace of the Righteous does give her a little bit of melee damage. She's strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2, so she might be able to bonk a Space Marine on the head or something and kill one as a counter attack. For 65 points though, she does deliver a fair few helpful buffs. She gets to choose one of the war hymns, and you could have her take 2 by taking that relic. Things like buffing a unit's Shield of Faith invul save could be pretty handy. She provides an aura ability that allows core units to do actions while still being able to shoot, good on Big Sisters units with bolters. And finally she has a command phase ability when one core unit gains Obsec or counts for double models if they already have it. Maybe it could be best used on those Sacrosants perhaps. They seem like the definition of a tanky unit that you'd want to make core if you could. Overall, I think that she does seem pretty solid as a buffing character for the points. I think she certainly holds her own against the other elite slot options. So those are the entirely new units. We do of course have the Palatine and Ephrael Stern in here as well, but we've already seen their datasheets once, so we'll cover those in the HQ section. For the rest of the datasheets, we'll just go through them, see what their new points costs are, and the main things that have changed about them compared with the previous Codex. The heart of the army is of course the Battle Sister Squad. They remain 11 points per model, and like the Abmeg, their max squad size has gone all the way up to 20. This is pretty good for any single unit buffs like those new war hymns. Getting a 5+ or even 4+ invul save on these could be pretty excellent, and it's quite nice with that stratagem to allow them to rapid fire bolters a long way and also only be wounded on a 4+. As per most of the other releases this year, their special and heavy weapons options have got a bit weird. You can only take one special or heavy weapon if you're 9 models or fewer. With 10 or more members in the squad, you can take 2 options, one of which can be a heavy weapon. And if you go for the max squad size of 20 models, you can have 4 special weapons, and up to 2 of these can be heavy weapons instead. Potentially could be interesting for stacking 4 of those artificer crafted storm bolters here to use that blessed bolt stratagem, or even just having a nasty anti-tank up close sting with the melter weapons. The opponent can't just lock you up, as you have access to the fall back and shoot stratagem. Otherwise, the Simulacrum Imperialis now costs +5 points again. It doesn't do anything different, just allows you to do an extra act of faith. Hand Flamers cost +5 points now due to the Flamer buffs, and regular Flamers are still 5 points as an upgrade, though are now strength 5. Overall, still a very solid troops choice, plenty of scope for different customization here, whether you're going for big 20 sister blobs, or maybe multiple small units packing special weapons. Moving on to the HQ choices, The Canoness is 50 points, and hers and the Palatine's reroll auras are only for core units now and don't work on themselves innately. The Brazier of Fire is only plus 5 points, it now does d6 auto hits, and on the roll of a 4+ you deal mortal wounds with those auto hits, which jumps down to a 2+ if you're firing at demons. It is a once per game ability. The Condemner bolt gun's been improved as we mentioned earlier. It does cost 10 points, but the stake mode is now AP-1 and damage 2, and it deals d3 mortal wounds if it hits a Psyker. The Blessed Blade is damage 2 from damage d3, and the Null Rod is significantly nerfed. It now costs 10 points from free, and its -1 to cast range is a bit lower, it only affects enemy Psykers within 12 inches. The Rod of Office is no longer an aura boost, it now allows you to pick a single extra core unit or character unit within 12 inches and get those reroll ones to hit. Allows her to command one extra unit within that big radius, while you still get all rebuffs on the nearby units. This one could be used on herself if she doesn't have anything else to buff. Overall still seems really solid, you can make fighty builds or buffing builds, and a few other tricks with the Null Rod or the Brazier. Next we have the Palatine for 45 points, basically a Canoness stat line with -1 wound and -1 attack. She does the reroll ones to wound aura, and that can be quite good with flamer weapons, as of course they don't roll to hit. Not much to say there, still a very solid character in the midst of a sister's battle line, not quite as flexible as the very customizable Canoness. Junitha Rita is a Canoness from the Order of Our Martyred Lady. She's boosted up to 130 points from 115. Her Hover Pulpit's Flamers are now Strength 6. Her mace is +1 strength to strength 6, AP-2 and damage 2. A little bit more of a melee threat there. And her buffing ability has been changed a bit. She now functions a bit like a Space Marine Chapter Master, making one core unit within 6 inches get full rerolls to hit. Finally, she no longer gives a buff to Shield of Faith anymore, but for a Sister's infantry unit entirely within 6 inches of her, they gain light cover. That will probably be strongest on those new Sacrosants, having that 2+ save go all the way down to a 1+ save. If you're running Order of Our Martyred Lady, she's got quite a lot of buffing value in the heart of a battle line, and then can even jump forward and toast some heretics with those flamers. Next up we have the Missionary, 40 points down from 45, and interestingly gaining the option for a Power Maul for +5 points. He's now got a new rule granting his leadership 8 to core Adeptus Ministorum units within 6 inches. Could be relevant on things like Arcoflagellants maybe. He gets the new style War Hymns, and if you're wanting to use hymn 1 to 3, then he's the cheapest way to get these into battle. Celestine and her Gemini are reimagined into a single 200 point unit. They used to be independent, and it does mean that you've got a unit of 3 character models there, meaning that if your opponent has the secondary for killing characters, they will score a lot of points for deleting these. Her melee and shooting have both been buffed. The Ardent Blade is AP-4, and on unmodified hit rolls of 6 cause 2 mortal wounds and the attack sequence to end. The Ardent Blade's Flamer mode shooting is now 12 inches at strength 6 and AP-2. And the Gemini's durability has been buffed a bit. They now get a 2+ save and must take wounds first before Celestine. Celestine herself is also tougher to kill. She's -1 damage, and she does retain her old rule of when she dies the first time, you roll a dice and on a 2+, she'll get back up with 4 wounds remaining at the end of the phase. Her Invul buff to Shield of Faith has now become her Warlord trait, but she still provides a general buff to Imperial Infantry. Any within 6 inches will get a 6+ Invul save, which could be kind of nice on units like Guard, or maybe Arcoflagellants that don't get a save. As if that all weren't enough, she has a 6-inch Heroic Intervention move, and if she does take damage, she has the option to sacrifice her moving and shooting to do an action, where her Healing Tears will both boost her back up to full wounds, and also set up an uninjured Gemini next to her that was slain earlier. Celestine has picked up so many stacked buffs here that she's just going to be a nightmare for the enemy army, I think. More lethal, much harder to kill, and likely just to get back up and do it all again the next phase after she dies. Seems like a pretty solid choice to me. The Triumph of St. Catherine has been bumped a bit in points, it's now 220 points, up from 195. Interestingly, despite its 18 wounds, it now counts as less than 9 wounds for the purposes of Lookout Sir. That means your opponent can't just focus on it and gun it off the board with heavy weapons straight away, and it really is going to be pretty hard to remove between that 4+ invul and -1 to hit. Most of its stats are largely unchanged, but it did gain an extra relic. The Fiery Heart gives auto-pass morale to Sororitas core units within 6 inches, and its Miracle Dice generating mechanic is one of the only ways that Sisters can essentially gain free easy Miracle Dice each turn. The Valorous Heart buff has been changed to getting all 6 Sacred Rites always active for the Triumph now. That means it'll always be +1 to charge and get exploding 6s in melee, no bad thing. And it can make the Sisters of Battle just a little bit hard hitting when they do Acts of Faith nearby. When you do an Act of Faith for a core or character within 6 inches, you can change one Miracle Dice result to the roll of a 6 each turn. Could be nice for some hefty damage out of some multi-melters. To me it still seems playable. Gaining that Lookout Sir rule is absolutely huge. It was a pretty annoying model to shoot down in the first place, and now you can't even target it directly. It's going to be a real menace handing out all those buffs in the Heart of a Sister's list. Next up we have Ephrael Stern and Kaiganil, 120 points, down from 125. They last appeared in Psychic Awakening Pariah. Now they're reborn as a 2-model character HQ unit, and Kaiganil must tank all the wounds first, dying before Ephrael Stern. They retain the Agent of the Imperium keyword, making them quite easy to add to other armies, and gain the Outcast keyword for Sisters of Battle. And they do have a special rule meaning that they can only be filled in Sororitas detachments or in auxiliary support, so if you're not Sisters and you want to run them, it is going to cost you 2 CP. In general though, the pair have seen an absolute ton of buffs. They both move 8 inches now. Ephrael gets +1 attack to strength 5, though she is -1 toughness to toughness 3. They both gain Zealot, so they'll be hitting with those attacks incredibly reliably, both Ephrael Stern's fairly hefty attacks and Kaiganil's flurry of blades. For an 120 point character unit, they're now really quite hard to remove. They get -1 to hit and to wound them. That goes a long way to countering out toughness 3. Even las cannons will need a 3+ to wound. They keep their mini smite ability that's better against chaos, and Ephrael's Sword Sanctity is strength +2, AP -3 and damage 2, and gains ignores invuls. That is a really big buff. Again, some really solid improvements here. I think they're pretty cheap for what they do as a beatstick character now, and I think that they could cause some severe problems if they're used intelligently. And moving on to the Elite's choices, we have the 3 Sisters of Battle buffing characters, all of which now cost 50 points. The Imagifier is 50 points, up from 45, although she has arguably been nerfed. Taylor the Stoic used to allow you to ignore AP -1, now unfortunately it's only -1 to wound when you're only attacked by strength 3 weapons. Kind of pointless this one, it will defend you against las guns, but pretty much nothing else. If I were running an Imagifier, I'd be quite tempted to take the relic that gets you 2 of the tails. The Tail of the Faithful and the Warrior seem like a good combo for a melee Sisters army. The Faithful one allows you to reroll advance and charges, and the Warrior gives you +1 strength. None of those are going to hurt at all on things like Sacrosanct, Repentia or Zephyrim. The Dialogus is 50 points, up from 40. I thought she was quite weak before, but now she's got a bit more of a role as she can take one of those new war hymns as she is a priest. The Dialogus and the Hospitaller are both really easy to field now. If there's a Canoness present in the detachment, they don't take up a battlefield role. The Dialogus can use her war hymns, and also any Sororitas unit within 6 inches can increase or decrease the result of a miracle dice by 1 when they use an act of faith. Could be good for turning a 5 into an all-important 6, and it's quite nice that it's not just usable on core units. This could also be used on things like Rhino chassis tanks, maybe getting a 6+ invul save out of a 5. Definitely a solid option for a buffing priest though, if you don't want to splash out for the Dogmata. Finally we have the Hospitaller, who is also significantly buffed as well. She's up to 50 points from 40, though has a far better role in that she gives a 6+ Feel No Pain aura to Sororitas infantry units within a 3-inch radius. She does lose her ability to auto-resurrect Sisters of Battle now. That has become a stratagem to resurrect D3 Sisters for 1 CP, but she still retains her healing ability, so if you have an injured character, she can help stitch them back together. To be honest, they all seem usable. They could easily form a sort of mini Sisters command squad. A lot of the core units will really benefit from all of their buffs. Next up, the Preacher has dropped to 25 points from 35. Those war hymns aren't quite as reliable. He has to cast them on a 3+, and it's only 1 unit, not everyone within 6 inches. He keeps his -1 leadership for chaos within 6 inches ability, and takes up no battlefield role slot if there's a missionary in the same detachment. He's gained an interesting new option called a Zealot's Vindictor. This is an Eviscerator Flamer thing, which I believe is meant to represent one of the Blackstone Fortress miniatures. It actually makes him into a genuinely quite good combatant for 25 points. His strength ×2, AP -2 and flat damage 2, with no penalty to hit, and then basically a heavy flamer profile in shooting. To be honest, for 5 points I think I'd upgrade to this, just in the off chance that he does get to counter-attack and use it to kill some models. Celestians are relatively unchanged comparatively, up to 13 points from 12. They no longer get full rerolls to hit when they're next to a Canoness, but it's not really all that different. They get +1 to hit when they're within 6 inches of a Canoness or Palatine. They also get the new Bodyguard rule wording. You can't target characters that are within 3 inches of them. Not too bad for another decent option to stack some buffs, but I feel like they might lose out a bit to big stacked squads of 20 of the standard Battle Sisters. I was wondering whether or not Repentia would receive some nerfs in this update, but Games Workshop has kept them very strong indeed, and if anything they might be a little bit better. The main reason is that they've dropped 2 points, down from 16 to 14, are largely unchanged. They're still core units and they get order abilities. The main changes to their stratagems: they lost that fight twice stratagem, but they did gain the fight in death one, so it means that your opponent really can't charge them safely unless they want to take a whole ton of chainsword attacks. For a 2-point buff, this seems very nice indeed. The Repentia Superior, however, is now well worth taking alongside Repentia, and she can be included alongside the squad without taking up a battlefield role. She provides 2 decent buffs to them. The main one is a 6-inch aura of +1 to wound for Repentia models. This is massively stronger than the reroll wound rolls of 1 ability. It means that they'll be wounding Space Marines and Gravis armor on 2s and any toughness 8 vehicles on 4s. It's thoroughly murderous and could be well worth the 40 points on its own. She then also has a command phase ability where you select one Repentia unit, they can advance and charge, and when they do charge, they charge 3d6 inches and drop the lowest. That will be around about an extra 4 or 5 inches to their threat range on average, though it is a bit of a shame that it's only usable in the command phase, which means that you can't use it after you get out of a vehicle. That +1 to wound buff is worth it alone though, and a squad of Bloody Rose Repentia alongside a Repentia Superior is still going to be a thing to be massively feared. Next we have the Ecclesiarchy Battle Conclave units. Crusaders are dropped massively, down to 11 points for 16, and they keep their 4+ invul save and 3+ armor save. You can take them in units of 2 still, so they're pretty much the ultimate unit for doing actions, and at least requiring a little bit of firepower to remove for the enemy. 22 points to raise a banner, deploy a scrambler, or just sit in a table quarter seems like a great investment. I'd expect to see small units of these run quite a lot. Arcoflagellants, like Repentia, I believe are massively improved. They've dropped down to 13 points per model from 15, and they've been boosted to toughness 4, retain their 5+ feel no pain save, and their 2 wounds. As Battle Conclave units, they don't get any synergy with orders or anything, but to be honest, they're really strong just as is. Their Arco Flails double their attacks, so each one will get 4 Strength 5 AP -1 Damage 1 attacks, hitting on 4s with full rerolls from Zealot. If you use their stratagem for 1 command point, that goes up to 6 attacks, which I think is pretty mad for just 13-point models. They're going to blend any infantry in close combat straight away. A unit of 10 for only 130 points will deliver you a crazy 45 Strength 5 AP -1 hits, on top of being at least relatively durable, at least compared with things like Repentia. They also have Endurant Implants, a 5-point upgrade for one model to get to Strength 6 and a big 6 attack space, so it can make the squad just hit just that little bit harder too. I think that these are going to see a lot more play now, though I think it still will be hard to turn down the absolute kills anything ability that the Repentia have, including being able to deal with heavies. Finally, Death Cult Assassins are 30 points each, unchanged. They gained weapon skill 2+ and always fight first. Otherwise, they're just the same as they ever were, very fast moving, 5+ invul saves, and attack with strength 4 power blades at AP -3. Pretty good damage output for the points, again could be a cheap unit to do actions and things. Maybe could be an interesting foil to small units like Drakari Witches or Incubi, who they'd kill quite well. Big buffs here to a section of the Codex that I think needed it. All of these look far more playable. Moving on to the fast attack, Dominions remain 12 points. Their special weapons got a couple of boosts. Their Artificer Stormbolters cost 5 points each, but they're damage 2 and are great with that Blessed Bolt stratagem. And those Ministorum Flamers are all strength 5 and can be made to get max hits with that stratagem Cleansing Fire. The biggest change to Dominions though is that now their scout move can be used on a Sororitas Rhino. It means that if they start their game embarked, that Rhino can then move 6 inches, and perhaps with an advanced move that could put them right within strike range even on first turn. Also, as there'd still be 5 transport slots left in the Rhino, it means they could actually take another unit along for the ride, maybe a unit like Repentia or Celestian Sacrosancts. It'd be very nice to have those starting slightly up the field in an armoured pillbox. Not 100% sure that that manoeuvre will survive the FAQ, but seems powerful until then. Seraphim are down to 14 points from 15, they gained +1 attack, and their Ministorum Handflamers are significantly nastier, going all the way up to strength 4 when they take them. The biggest change was in the stratagem section. Now they can't use their Inferno pistols straight out of Deep Strike, but that double shoot stratagem still seems really interesting when combined with the Flamers. As I mentioned, that could lead to an average of 36 strength 4 hits out of a 90-point unit on the turn that they come in. Seems like a solid option for clearing screens. Finally, for the fast attack, we have Zephyrim, who were moved here from the Elite section. Probably for the best as well, seeing as the Elite section is really overcrowded right now. They're 17 points down from 18, but to be honest they have received quite a big nerf to their datasheet. They're largely unchanged, they still have strength 4 power swords and they gain +1 attack, so they have 3 each at base, 4 with Bloody Rose, but they lost their big ability to reroll wound rolls. That was the thing that I think kept them quite so competitive, as it meant that they were quite good even against really tough things. Now they're going to be far more focused on a light infantry hunting roll. maybe doing best against slightly elite light infantry, maybe like other sisters. They still can gain +1 to wound with a stratagem, though that stratagem does cost 2 command points, so it's a bit pricey, and they could be a good option for the auto wounding on 6's ability that Bloody Rose gets. Overall though, they don't seem quite as competitive than before, maybe best used as a single big unit to make the best use of a stratagem or two. Next we come to the heavy support, and Retributors have seen a big nerf. They're down to 12 points from 14, so they do drop about 10 points per 5-woman squad, but they've received 3 different nerfs for that trouble. They can no longer move and shoot for no penalty. It doesn't matter with heavy flamers, but it's a big nerf to the heavy bolters and multi-melters. Their Armorium cherubs can only be used once per shooting phase now, rather than using both at the same time on the turn that they come in, and they no longer have that stratagem that increases their range and makes them a little bit more hard-hitting. It's not all bad news, they have dropped in points, they gained Ignores Cover as a base ability, really good for the non-multi-melter weapons, and those heavy flamers have now gone up to strength 6 as well. I think they won't be quite such an auto-include unless you're running Argent Shroud though, and even they will still take the penalty to hit if they come in from Strategic Reserve. Overall, perhaps a bit more balanced, but it does seem that Retributor multi-melters aren't literally the top-tier anti-tank choice in Warhammer 40k now. Next we have the Engines of Redemption, the Penitent Engine and the Mortifier. Both of their datasheets are a lot more similar now. They both have an 8-inch movement, they both get Zealot, which is a massive buff for the Mortifiers, and they both have a 5+ Feel No Pain, before only the Penitent Engine had that. Previously, everyone used to take the Flails, but they have been nerfed a little bit. They now only multiply your attacks by 2, not by 3, and they're down to strength 5 from strength 6. It's definitely a nerf to the Penitent Engine with those Flails, but with the Mortifier, the Zealot buff actually almost balances that out. They are a little worse than before, though not much. The Buzz Blades that are damage 2 and strength 8 got a small buff as well. They go up to AP-4. Points-wise, the Mortifiers remain at 60. They did lose their Advance and Shoot rule, and their Mortal Wounds and Death ability has become a stratagem. Instead, they gain a 4+ ability to fight in death if they hadn't already fought that turn. It means that if your opponent charges the Mortifiers, they should be pretty likely to deal some return damage at the very least. Gaining Zealot for reroll hits in the fight phase and the 5+ Feel No Pain is really quite big though, and for 60 points they still seem like a really good option. For 60 points they have a pretty crazy combo of solid firepower, good movement, good melee, and good durability. It's hard to go too far wrong. Penitent Engines are 55 points, up from 50. To distinguish them from Mortifiers, they get a different ability. They can now advance and charge, so we'll get into melee a bit faster, and whenever they pile in and consolidate, they get +2 inches to the movements. They'll quite like the buff of being a little bit faster, and also the buff to their heavy flamers going up to strength 6. If you are taking the heavy flamers, then you could spend that 2 command point stratagem to get a crazy 48 auto hits with strength 6, and that's before you charge into combat if there's anything left. I really like the Engines of Redemption. I think they will continue to see play. Aside from the Castigator, the last heavy support choice is the Exorcist. It's dropped a bit in points, down to 150 from 165, and as before, the big missile launcher with the strength 8 missiles costs an extra 30 points. The Exorcist has received what I'd say are a number of unneeded nerfs, to be honest. Its toughness 8 has gone down to toughness 7, its 11 wounds down from 12, and both types of rockets drops a point of AP, down from AP-3 to AP-2, and AP-2 to AP-1 for the conflagration rockets. On top of also losing core as well, it's really not so good news for the Organ of Destruction. It can't make good use of a lot of the Sisters' stratagems. The main reason that I would want to take one would be to use the 2 command point stratagem to fire ignoring line of sight. That is a really powerful ability to get those crack missiles to be able to shoot something anywhere on the table, but I do feel like you're paying through the nose for it between the investment for the tank and 2 CP for every turn that you really want to do it. I guess you could maybe accept a slightly subpar unit for most games, but just every so often when it comes up, fork out the 2 CP, and it could genuinely be quite game changing. I don't think that running more than one Exorcist makes sense now though. For the transports, we have the Rhino at 80 points. It sees the normal Rhino changes to 9th edition, smoke launchers are now a stratagem for -1 to hit, and self-repair is gone. Still solid, still gets that 6-up invul save, a great battle taxi for Sacrosanct, Dominions, and Repentia. The Immolator is now 120 points base, down from 125. That gets you the triple heavy bolter loadout, so a bit of firepower and 6 transport slots. The Immolation Flamers are now +10 points on that, and they gained 18-inch range. The big melters are up +30, so 150 points, which to be honest seems quite overpriced for the amount of firepower that you get, and in general it's just not all that efficient. It does have the option to auto-explode, which is kind of fun. I just don't really think that people are going to fork out for it when they could just buy a much cheaper Rhino and invest their damage dealing points in more efficient units elsewhere. Finally, we come to the Sisters Fortification, the Battle Sanctum. This costs 80 points, up from 55, and it's now a terrain feature with these traits: inspiring to Ministorum units, obscuring, breachable, defensible, light cover, and scalable. It's interesting being able to deploy an obscuring piece of terrain in your deployment zone. Could allow you to hide something out of line of sight that wouldn't otherwise be able to. Though, as always with fortifications, if you are playing on dense boards, you might literally have nowhere good to set this up. You can't deploy fortifications within 3 inches of already existent terrain pieces, and with the normal terrain density on 9th edition boards, it can just be very hard to set up indeed. The Miracle Dice ability is also just a little bit more annoying to access. You need a Sororitas Infantry or Cult Imperialis Priest to do an action. It lasts from the end of the movement phase to the end of your turn, so they won't be doing any shooting or charging in the turn that they're busy praying. I think that this could potentially still be well worth taking if you were able to set up the terrain a bit closer to other bits, but as it is, I wouldn't be turning up to tournaments with it in fear of not being able to set it up properly. So that gets us to the end of the datasheets and the end of the review for Codex Adepta Sororitas. Overall, I'd say that it does seem to represent a small power boost for the faction, though maybe not as crazy leaps and bounds as, say, for example, the Drakari Codex. To be honest, Sisters didn't really need a buff that much. They were already doing very well without this book, and I still think that they're going to be doing very well now they've got it. I think that we'll see Bloody Rose played quite a bit, maybe a bit of Ebon Chalice, and maybe quite a few armies building around certain stratagems, such as Blessed Bolts or Cleansed by Fire, for some nice, easy, hefty damage output. For buffing rules, I think that we'll likely see the Shield of Faith boosting Warlord Trait and Righteous Rage on Morven Val, and perhaps some of the strongest relics might be the ones to allow double war hymns or extra Imagifier tails. In terms of raw value gifted to units, they seem like really good return on your command points. For the most part, I feel like a lot of the units are quite balanced in the book. Perhaps the biggest losers are the tanks, the regular Celestians, and perhaps the Zephyrim, but that does leave us with quite a lot of the rest of the Codex to play with. Morven Val seems like a complete monster and a great unit to have at the heart of a Sisters list. Sisters will be really spoilt for choice with what to put in their rhinos, whether it's Repentia, Arcoflagellants, Sacrosants, or scouting dominions with Melters or Stormbolters. A 20-strong Sisters unit could be an interesting brick at the centre of the battle line, layered with a couple of the more powerful single unit buffs, and I still think that Mortifiers will remain incredibly good indeed. I really liked their rules before, and they don't really seem to have lost anything now. Finally, those Ecclesiarchy Battle Conclave units, the Crusaders and the Death Court Assassins, I think they'll likely be the unsung heroes of the Sisters list. Having a 22-point cheap infantry unit that can perform actions and get in table quarters is really good value, and that will add up with extra victory points as the game goes on. So let me know what you think of the Sisters Codex. Anything in particular jump out at you? Or are there any important rules interactions that I've missed, or any mistakes that I've made? Please let me know down in the comments below. I'll certainly be making a fair few more Sisters unit reviews over the next few days, certainly hoping to cover Morven Val, the Paragons, and plenty of the others, so if you'd like to see that, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I do generally post new 40k videos every single day. Finally, I'd just like to mention the channel's Patreon page. Making videos does take an enormous amount of time, particularly the long detailed Codex reviews like this. I believe the Sisters of Battle Codex review is the single longest video I'll have ever made. It takes literally days to make these reviews, so if you are getting good value out of them, any support is enormously appreciated. There is a link to the Patreon down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain new videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry to the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.